Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. China has been a member of the WTO since December the 11th in 2001. The accession of China was preceded by a lengthy process of negotiations and required significant changes to the Chinese economy. At the time, it signified China's deeper integration into the world economy. 17 years later, things have changed. China is no longer a student of globalization, but rather a firm upholder. And the WTO also needs reform, necessary reform. The world is certainly at a crossroad now. Which direction should we go? Here's a quick peek at the past 17 years.
I turn now to the accession of the People's Republic of China.
A milestone of China's opening up.
So agrees.
When the country joined the World Trade Organization, it promised to bring down tariffs to 10%, achieved in 2010. As China carried on, it has established 11 free trade zones since 2013. More cuts to tariffs followed, with 4.4% the latest average cited by the Ministry of Commerce, a competitive rate even for developed nations. State-owned companies make up less of the economy, with more than 26% in 2017. The multilateral trading system and its rules, with the WTO at its core, were established through joint consultation based on the goal of maintaining free trade. Since joining, China tied deeply into the global economy and became a big supporter of globalization. However, amid growing global trade tensions, the call for WTO reforms is high, with the support of G20 leaders. Although it may take time and may become more complicated, all members agreed to take the path of improvement.
The past 17 years about the WTO. Earlier, I sat down with Yi Xiaozhun, the Deputy Director General of the WTO. He represented China as a key facilitator in China's WTO accession process, making an important contribution to the negotiations. But now he is serving the World Trade Organization. I asked him the one question he cannot avoid. Is the WTO still relevant today? Mr. Yi, welcome to CGTN.
Thank you.
Is WTO still going to be relevant at all? That's a question many ask these days.
Of course, WTO is the most important multilateral system, and it will continue to be the foundation of world trade. You cannot find any better alternative for WTO. So I don't think you can choose. It's the only thing you can rely on.
But at the same time, some say, why don't we just destroy it and build a new one? Is it possible?
It's very unlikely, or it's impossible to do it, because WTO has a big value for its members. It provided stability and predictability for world trade. And it registered a very good record of anti-protectionism. Let's remember the value of WTO during financial crisis. It prevented its members from competing for raising trade barriers. That's a great contribution.
But the question is, what about now? I mean, WTO now you face several issues, right? You have the appellate body almost collapse next year if there's no new judges. Well, some economies are giving it a hard time. Secondly, you also have even the steel aluminum trade. One trade dispute involving so many nations together. Thirdly, you got a lot of political issues that WTO is not up to this resolve, and yet all pushed to WTO. So what can you do about that? And then?
Well, of course, WTO is about trade. WTO will not be competent to deal with political issues. So you have to seek or recourse to other mechanisms to resolve those political tensions. But when it comes to trade, I think WTO is well equipped to resolve those issues. And we have all instruments and the tools to do it. But the challenge is whether our members are willing to cooperate, whether they want to put their disputes in the framework of WTO. I think that's a challenge. Of course, WTO should be modernized, and the WTO should move forward to keep pace of the times. But that means we need to improve it, not destroy it. I think that's very clear.
Shall I say some of the major economies in the world are having an apparent trade war going on right now, and they drag WTO into it. But the question is, how do you, I mean, with the WTO, be able to work with the economies all over the world to avoid being into a political fight, while at the same time to sharpen the future of the WTO?
We know that some of our largest members are fighting each other. But meanwhile, we believe that the multilateral trading rules are still applicable to those members. And those members still come to WTO to put their disputes to resolve. I think that's a good sign that they still have confidence in WTO. And of course, we need to have a multilateral discussion to address those issues.
Trade and economic ties, Mr. Yi, used to be the so-called stabilizing factor for many bilateral and multilateral relations. And now with the turbulence going on, whether it's trade war or the debate about international governance system, including the WTO, what role will it still be? That is a big question facing, I guess, everyone now. Your thought?
Well, trade continues to be extremely important. And trade reduce the poverty, and the trade help a lot of developing countries to advance, including China. But meanwhile, we want to make trade more inclusive, and we want to make trade more rule-based. So that's why we need WTO as a most important rule-based system to help. And now all members are discussing what we can do to make the rules more efficient, more effective, and more modernized. And that's the issue being discussed by our members.
But Mr. Yi, discussion could take a lot of time, as we all know, and it should be. However, on the other hand, you do see the urgency. On the one hand, you got a trade war going on. On the other hand, people say that is really threatening the potential of the world economy. And we all know if the world economy is going down, that would mean devastating situations for many, particularly from the developing countries. So how do you see this so-called urgency and the procedure?
I think it's a good question. We always say that crisis may be turned to opportunities. Now is the example we can do. The current crisis of WTO remind our members that we need to do something quickly and urgently. That's why we see in the past few months, our members are discussing what we can do and what should be the priorities. And I think those issues, as you said, it can drag very long, but meanwhile, due to this crisis, members are trying to speed up.
One thing about WTO is it is consensus-based. All your members have to agree to a certain plan before it comes into being. And therefore, that takes time. But that is also the beauty of it, because you have to be inclusive in the rulemaking. But now here's the danger, that you see some of the bilateral, multilateral, and regional trade mechanism being rebuilt with priorities only from certain countries, because the other economies are too small to bargain. Will that waves of change in a way also have an impact on the reform or updating of WTO? That's what a lot of developing countries are asking.
I think those bilateral deals and the regional agreements will have impact on WTO reform. But for me, I think I would say that those bilateral or regional agreements can be a building block for WTO reform. And meanwhile, I think you are right that consensus is difficult to reach. But meanwhile, in WTO, we do have some other format to reach agreement, like we call it information technology agreement,
right,
or government procurement agreement. Those are plurilateral agreements, but they will be applied on the most favored nation treatment basis. So that is to say, they will benefit every member, no matter you are a signatory or not. So I think that can be another possible way for some or a group of members to move forward.
Mr. Yi, as you may be very well aware, for international organizations, WTO is only one of those. Many of those international mechanisms is facing one issue, the definition issue. What is developing country? What is developed economy? What is a market economy? What is a non-market economy? And these are coming into this huge debate, and this could drag a long time to go, which is threatening the world economy. So, Mr. Yi, how do you see these debates, if not conflicts, involving on the definition in the whole discussion and reform process?
I would say this is a kind of fake issue because you will never find any definition in WTO about developing or developed country or market or non-market economy. I think the key is what kind of commitments you can agree to take in the WTO. For example, I mean, look at Singapore or Hong Kong. They still belong to kind of a group of developing economies, but they committed a lot, more than most of developed countries. They reduced their tariffs to zero, and their economies are very open. So I don't think it's a definition problem. It's an issue how much you can commit yourself to take multilateral responsibilities.
Mr. Yi, some say that we're likely to experience something much worse than what is right now before it gets better. Of course, that's according to some economists. But if we look at the picture, it is not necessarily very optimistic. So from an international platform such as WTO, how do you see your next few steps ahead when you're talking about reform, when you're talking about serving your members, and we are talking about the overall restructuring of the international governance system? Mr. Yi.
Well, in WTO, our members continue to discuss some important issues like old issues, agriculture services, market access, and fishery subsidies, and some new issues, e-commerce, investment facilitation, and domestic regulations of services. I think all those issues should be taken forward, and our members are taking them very seriously. But some issues may go quicker than other issues.
Like what?
Well, it's up to our members to decide. But personally, for example, fishery subsidies, the deadline is next year. So I hope that our members can deliver their commitment to reach agreement by the end of next year.
When we talk about reform and upgrading, there's always the issue of principle. With what principle we are upgrading? With what principle we are reforming? And involve whom? Who will be the decision maker? Those are important, particularly if you look at the Asia-Pacific region. A lot of vibrancy going on. Developed and developing countries, emerging economies, all in one. So, to you, how to see that process, principles?
Well, again, I would say that WTO is a member-driven organization. It's up to our members to decide. And meanwhile, we always emphasize that we need to make the process and agreement, any agreement in the future, inclusive. That is to say, big members, small members, and least developed members, they all have say, they all have interest, and they all have ownership. We believe that's the beauty or the merit of multilateral system.
Finally, before we go, Mr. Yi, China is celebrating the 40 years anniversary of reform and opening up. And China certainly was one of those countries after entry into the WTO with the hard work of the Chinese people. Its economy has been taking off in the world. Mr. Yi, if I ask you from the international organization's perspective, how do you see this process of China and the role that China has taken so far? And to proceed into the future, how do you see economies like China's will be able to face up to its challenges? What could be some of the interesting and important principles China could get from international organizations or people who have been working in the international governance system?
Well, I think China benefited from its own opening, and it's also benefited a lot from multilateral trading system. So I would suggest that China continue to commit to multilateralism, to trade liberalization, and to economic reform. And meanwhile, China needs to recognize that China is so big that whatever kind of policies you are going to make, it got to have a kind of spillover effect. So when you establish your own domestic policies, you need to think about the external effect. That will give some comfort to your trading partners, and that will reduce the trade tensions in the future.
And that's what globalization is about as well.
Of course.
Mr. Yi, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your time out of your very busy schedule.
Thank you very much.
Yi Xiaozhun, the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From Tian Wei and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.